You are now tuned in to the Project 365 experience.
Very, very excited to have a good friend of mine, somebody that keeps pushing me to critically think the game, somebody that I've gotten to know over the years, Menelik Fernandes, York assistant for 3 years, Halton head coach for 1 year. Fleming, you got the chance to be the interim and be the lead assistant for a period of 2 years, right? Lawrence Park, you were for 2 years, you were the head coach, and also the founder of Toronto Terror and Terror Prep, which is going into the second year of running. My friend Menelik Fernandes, how you doing?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. The people won't know that we shoot the shit back and forth all the time via text, and whenever we see each other, we're always giving each other little tidbits, but it's always a pleasure to have friends in and around the game that want to get better, want to challenge me and make me think about things differently, and don't comment on how big the hair has gotten. Any of that kind of stuff. But no, it's a real pleasure to be able to sit down with you, and I'm happy to finally be able to get on your show, man.
And what's funny? You're kind of like, I would say, one of the pioneers in Canada, because you do have a couple of series. You have your series, right? Run It Back, which was one of the most insightful things that I got the chance to be a part of during the pandemic. Can you just elaborate, like, how did that start back? The Run It Back series on YouTube.
Well, appreciate you saying that. It's actually, I just looked at this week. It's actually 11 months since I've done one, and I've been very seriously thinking about starting it back up, but it became really difficult when the pandemic ended, I guess, or closed down or slowed down, whatever, to consistently get guests on. Like, what was a way of life during the pandemic where we were all on every day trying to get better, kind of gave way for, well, I got to get in the gym. I've got all these athletes. So, I mean, it was understandable, but it's too long now, because for me, it was the best thing that had happened in my life. So to answer your question and go back, we were really restricted in Canada. I was really sad, depressed, whatever you want to say, because basketball is what brings me joy. I really enjoy it. It's definitely something that monopolizes my time. And it's something that, I'm always looking at ways to get better at. So couldn't get in a gym, couldn't play outside, just silly restrictions all over the place. And I was a member of the Rising Coaches community. Shout out to Adam. And, just kind of decided, all right, well, let me fumble through a podcast and see if I can do this. It's sort of the way that everybody's doing stuff. And it's funny because if you watch it, I recorded 101 shows over 2 years, one a week for 2 years. And the first 5 or 6 are pretty bad, to be quite honest. Really, it's just me trying to come up with something that works. And then I was very fortunate to, I phoned up Charles Duperbré, who at the time was an assistant with the Raptors.
Yep, with the Raptors.
Yeah. And Charles and I only had a loose relationship, but I knew that his name and his title would really help bring in some popularity to the show. And it would just be kind of a cool idea to do. And the format changes dramatically in the 6th episode when I do it with him, where it's like, we go 45 minutes on like, how do you prepare for a game? And then 45 minutes talking about like things that happened in the game. So I'd actually pull film from the game and question these coaches, like, well, why are you running this set here? What are you trying to attack? Who are you going at? What's the strength you're looking for? All those kinds of things that when you're, sort of a junior coach, you really want to ask these senior coaches, like, why? What are you thinking here? What do I not see? And to his credit, he was incredible and stayed on afterwards. And it kind of became a thing that just took off. So because my first guest was Charles Duperbré, gave it a little bit of clout, I suppose you could say, where I felt I could reach out to some more senior level coaches. And the names that are on there, Cody Toppert, Ro Russell is obviously a paramount name in Canada. Larry Blunt, geez, it just goes on and on and on. Lamar Barrett, Trey Montgomery, Cabral Huff. I mean, these are guys from the NBA all the way down to high school from all around the world. Kostas Kologeropoulos, who is from Greece, he's a pro coach. Shout out Max Nelaton, who just became the youngest head coach in France. He did my show. It just was an incredible experience. I got to literally sit there, ask some questions, hang back, and listen to brilliant coaches talk about why they do what they do. And I mean, it's terribly niche. I know this is a long answer. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. It's
Hit it.
terrible, but I really love the experience.
It's so funny because now looking back at where we started from in the pandemic, and then everybody was kind of forced to either reevaluate or change certain things that they had to do, right? And I remember myself just really starting to fall in love with watching film, watching games, and that kind of stuff during the pandemic, because that is all I could do, right?
Yep, that's really what it was, right? Necessity.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What is the biggest takeaway that you get? Like now we're almost 3.5, 4 years removed. What is the biggest takeaway that you would take from, going through that?
That I was arrogant and brash, and that I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did, and that the best course of action is to realize that you know nothing and ask questions and try and get better. I mean, it's really what it came down to. I met, I'm going to shout out a group of guys that we call ourselves the bullies, but I met the bullies during the pandemic, pretty much originally through Lamar Barrett, who's an NBA scout, who quickly became like a mentor to me. But the whole group of gentlemen, there's about 18 of us that, they're gentlemen that we can reach out and help each other with life situations, talk about players, talk about basketball. Every week we get on a Zoom for 3.5 years, every Sunday and almost every Wednesday. We're there, complaining about, filling each other in on updates, all that kind of stuff. But it goes back to what I said. We don't know nearly as much as we think we do, and we're not challenging ourselves enough. And we need to be better at helping each other out, especially in Canada basketball.
Absolutely. Just the giving, right? Like, I kind of find like there's kind of like this idea that there's secrets. Like everybody has the secret sauce that's going to lead to them winning a game, and nobody really wants to share, right?
Bro, get out of here. Like you got 5 players that are 6'7" with 40-inch vertical leaps. I got 5 guys that are 5'10". There's no secret sauce here. You're probably going to win that game. And once you put it on film, I think I'm good enough now at this point in my career that I can figure it out. Like, oh, they're tagging from the opposite side. No big deal. Or it's a high tag, or it's a band tag, or they're 3-way switching, or whatever it is. Now, I know not everybody can do that, but like this secretness that you're talking about, it drives me insane. Like, I understand that me and a certain coach might not be friendly enough that he's willing to open up the bag of tricks and give me everything. I get it, no problem. But at the same time, if I'm asking a fairly simple question, like, hey man, why are you going over on that instead of under? I'm not attacking you. I'm genuinely curious. Why are you doing that? Like, what do you see that I don't? Maybe I could start thinking in a different way. And this, it's another really big take from the COVID era. This is a real problem we have in Canada compared to the United States. Almost every coach in the United States is like, here's my playbook. I don't care. Take the whole thing, right? Like, I stole it from somebody. They stole it from somebody. I didn't invent flex, right? Like, I didn't invent Princeton. It's like, there's some little wrinkles that I can throw in that make it work for my players, but this is the basis of it, and this is what I'm trying to do. At the end of the day, players win and coaches lose. Get out of your own way.
I love what you're saying, because like, even for me, like, there's a couple things that that I've really grown from in the pandemic and learning about all these sets and everything, learning sets, learning actions, learning different ball screen coverages and that kind of stuff. As much as possible, when you learn all that strategy, there's a real human element to the game. Whether a coach can get the buy-in of his players, whether certain players get along with each other, whether they communicate, there's a real human aspect that you having all the plays and the X's and O's doesn't give you the hedge, doesn't give you the advantage.
Well, the cliche is, right, it's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmys and Joes, so to speak, or whatever. But, like, the thing is, to me, is I think that if you're gonna be a good coach, you have to have both. You have to recognize what you're not good at and what you are good at, and then you have to seek people who complement you well. So I'm gonna give a big shout out to Cameron Moore, who is the gentleman who started Terror Prep with me. He was a former player of mine on Toronto Terror years ago, and would have played for me at Fleming had I continued to be the head coach there. But basically, he and I, we worked 2 full summers through COVID, just trying to get him better, really getting his shots up, getting his fitness out there. And he was great. He made huge, leaps and bounds, but it looked like, all right, this isn't going to work out. So he jumped on staff with me, so to speak, and started Terror Prep. And part of the reason, like, I'm an older guy. I'm in my 40s. Cam is 21, turning 22. So a lot of people look at us and they're like, well, that's a really odd pairing for the people that are leading this. And I'm like, well, we complement each other well, because in certain things that I'm soft on, he's hard. And on certain things that he's soft on, I'm hard. And we both understand the value of what we bring to the table, and how it's different and how it's similar. And we work well together so far, knock on wood, who knows long term or whatever. But like right now, it seems to work very well, where it's exactly what you're saying. Like, I'm not a good motivator. I never have been. I was a point guard, and when I played, it was really this, dude, get off the floor. You're not trying. That's my motivation. Your shit, get out of here. Pardon my language. Like you're just really not bringing what you're supposed to be bringing. I don't understand at all, and I don't want to understand, if I'm paraphrasing Kobe, I don't want to understand people who need external motivation. You're playing a game, and it's a fun game. And if you're good at it, you shouldn't need somebody else to cattle prod you to go. So I have other coaches that are good at motivation. I'm pretty good at X's and O's. I'm not always the best recruiter. So I have other coaches that are like, this dude will do what it is that we need in those sets, which is awesome because they understand how what I do works well with what they do, and we put it together.
So it's almost like you need to hire, like, self-awareness, be aware of what you are, right? And like when building a staff, you almost like gotta hire or get people that kind of like are good at the things that you're not good at. And it's about being able to have that understanding that, hey, I'm not good as this.
Yeah.
I need to get better at this part.
Yeah.
Or I need to hire somebody specific for this.
So I have 2 quick answers.
Yeah. Yep. Hit me.
One is the self-awareness is a major part, right? There's so many people. I've been on staffs where guys are like, I don't want a yes man, but then you challenge them on something and they're like, dude, there's the door. And it's like, you literally said you don't want somebody who's just gonna pat you on the back. Like, dude, I'm sorry, that doesn't work in that scenario. Here's why. But then the second element of this, like, I'm a parent and I teach this to my daughter all the time. You need to seek out people in life that you don't agree with. You need to. If everyone around you thinks exactly the same as you and they're a bird just chirping back what you're saying, you're in an echo chamber. You're never going to be challenged, and you've already achieved your ceiling. That's it. It's over. You're as smart as you're ever going to be. People who you can disagree with and still have a conversation with are paramount to your development in life. There's a way to disagree. There's a time to disagree. There's language to use to disagree. But the people who understand those things are only going to make you better. And if you are afraid of that, don't coach. Because first of all, this is already kind of a bummy profession in terms of what they pay and the hours and all that kind of stuff or whatever.
And the
But
investment, yeah.
exactly. But at the end of the day, you're never going to get better and you're never going to help anybody else develop.
Mhm. Oh man. So how has it been? Like you transition from the pandemic, you go into terror prep, you guys start that. Like now you got all these ideas and now it's about the execution. How does all of that kind of like and you're
I think
smiling.
I think I had a bit of an advantage in that obviously I had been coaching for a long time and that I had run an AAU program before. So I was not unfamiliar with the intricacies of traveling with younger people, right? Like I know, I need permission forms for this, or this kid needs a visa and that one doesn't. Like I've been through a lot of that. So there was some experience there to tap into. I knew, tournament organizers, had pretty good connections through, especially through COVID and the show,
Mhm.
able to find some pretty good games and good competition. But it was challenging at first because the idea was basically this is our selling pitch, our principle. We don't want to play in Canada at all. We don't want to play in any leagues at all. We want to run a completely independent schedule and we want to get the best competition we can possibly get. So you say that, and that sounds awesome. Until now, you're like, ooh, this world's pretty big. Who's going to play me? When? Where? How am I getting there? All those kinds of things, right? Like, what do the logistics actually look like? So, that first month was a lot of number crunching and figuring stuff out. And we figured out that the best thing that we could possibly do was buy a van.
Mhm.
And I was in the process of buying a car, and I don't make a lot of money on paper. So it was tricky getting that done. But we managed to pull through and get it done. And that was a game changer for us. So we were able to get to quite a bit more stuff. We put on almost 70,000 kilometers in the first 8 months, which is more than once around the world. We traveled 14 different times for the prep season. We've been away, I think, 3 or 4 times for AAU currently. And it was a real game changer for us to be able to get the van and to be able to get out on the road. And slowly you see, just as you would suspect, when you show up more and more places, your network continues to grow. People invite you to other things. And, kudos to the guys that I had. Most guys were completely willing to travel on a drop of a hat. And I think we had a really good first season. I really do.
Yeah, and you were just telling me about your schedule. You go to Vegas. Driving to Vegas is insane, by the way.
So we're actually planning on doing this again for July. It's currently May right now, and we're looking at the numbers, and I'm like, damn, man. So I actually drove down to Florida and then over to Vegas and then back. So that's the longest trip I've ever done as a driver, and it was intense to say the least. Like I went to Florida 4 times during this prep season. That trip is becoming second nature. Ironically, 2,000 kilometers, no problem, let's go. But then when you're
Yeah,
going,
let's do it.
yeah. So we were going from DME to the Tarkanian, which is in Las Vegas, and DME is in Daytona Beach. And when we cut across the country, we stopped in New Orleans, we stopped in Albuquerque, and we stopped in Dallas. So it was a full week in between the two with 3 stops. And the kids got to see Bourbon Street. The kids got to see the house from Breaking Bad. The kids got to see Dallas, Texas, which we actually ended up coming back to a tournament in a few weeks later, which is a really cool city. If you guys get a chance to travel with your guys there, do it. It's awesome. And then going through all the stuff, like all the mountains as you're coming in to Vegas is unbelievable. Like it's like I had never seen the Hoover Dam, and I had been to Vegas maybe 6 times prior.
Flying,
And
Flying. You don't see it.
yeah,
Driving is different.
I mean, like you're kind of like, oh, there it is, or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
like to actually drive and see the scale of it and the red rock everywhere, and like there's, I don't know if you would know this, but like there's a section before you get to Vegas where it's like, this is the last gas station before you get to Vegas. So if you break down between here and Vegas, good luck. You're in the desert and it's 118, so try not to die. Like,
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that it's like, wow, man, this is real world planning that you've got to like factor in and take care of and all that. But I mean, in terms of where we went, we Florida 4 times, Atlanta 3 times. We were in North Carolina for a week. We did South Carolina, we did Virginia, we did Las Vegas, we were in Texas, we were in Pennsylvania. We had a really good year in terms of travel. The kids got to cross through 31 different states and see and play in 9 different states. So I would hang my hat on. I think I traveled more than any prep program in Canada this year. And I believe I'm going to do more the next season coming up. So
It's
fingers crossed.
insane. Terror prep. And what's really funny is that as much as we love the game, and us being able to learn all these X's and O's, these tendencies of players, these scouting and everything, how good does it feel to show kids an experience or have them see a place that they have never thought in a million years that they'd be able to see before?
So I'll tell you something. It's a bit of a tangent. I'll get back to your question, but I'll tell you something that I feel is really interesting about all of this. We as coaches don't really know our players well enough for when they're being recruited to confidently speak about them. When you're in a prep program and you travel with the kids frequently, now you get to actually really see who these kids are. Like, you know who flushes the toilet and who doesn't. You know who cleans up after themselves. You know who does dishes, who does laundry. Like, you get a real sense of who these kids are very quickly.
I'm gonna cut you real quick, just adding on to what you're saying. Who, even if I travel, who is going to take it as a vacation, or who is actually going to be able to keep their routine or try to find a new routine in a new environment?
100%. So part of my sales pitch now, when kids call me and like, hey, I'm interested in Terra Prep, blah, 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 blah. Part of my spiel is you're going to find out very quickly whether you want to do this or not. Because professional basketball, and I'm sure, being around the Ville, like you've met many professional basketball players, but professional basketball is hard, right? Like, you want to be the only North American person in a random city in Europe where they don't like you, or where, you're expected to score 30 a game. And if you score 27, they're throwing you on a plane to go home at your cost. Or, you're over here, like you said, my routine back home was I would get shots between here and here, but there's no gym in this city. So I got to figure something else out. Or I only eat these kinds of foods because I'm very particular about my diet. But now I'm in Albania and they don't offer that at all. Story. And it's like, you're going to find out very quickly who you are as a person, how resourceful you are, and if you can do this at a high level or not. Like, it's great to have the tools and, have the size, have the speed, have the length, all those. It's great to have those. They're definitely needed. There is definitely a character portion that it's like, dude, are you hard as nails inside, or are you Charmin? Because if you're Charmin, you might as well leave right now, because dudes are going to sniff that out and eat your food.
Yeah.
But like I said, I confidently can speak on a lot of my kids. When college coaches ask about somebody, I'm like, well, let me tell you, I'll give you this story about him, or blah, blah, blah. Like, it's very easy to really start to see who's who. We had a kid who didn't play. We played IMG and we ended up losing by, I think, 11, and we were winning for 38 minutes of that game. And we
IMG national team.
Yeah, with Big Olivier, their 7'6" kid and all that. And a lot of scouts were like, dude, why didn't you tell me your players were this good? And I'm like, I have been all year. And they chalked it up to like, oh, this is a great second place type deal, and participation trophy. And I'm like, I would have won this game, except one of my starters didn't play because he got caught stealing and I didn't play him. Right. So like, you want to find out about character. Well, there it is. Right. Like, like you very quickly find out things about players when you're in another country that you're like, wow, that's interesting. Especially when you're traveling. Like, our weeks were usually like, we leave on Thursday, we come back on Monday. we're home until Thursday and we're gone again. Kids basically get 2 days of sleep and we're on the road.
Yeah, I could live. You're talking about this, and it's just like coming back to me. Like it was the same thing for me as well. Like you travel so much, and it's like, sometimes hard to, I guess, think of it as a break. It really is a job, and those who love it, you're gonna find out real quick if you love basketball or if you kind of like it. There's a big difference.
A lot of young kids see the things that come with being a baller. Attractive women, hanging out in the culture, music, all that kind of stuff, dressing a certain way, etc. But when it comes down to like, are you putting in the work? Are you getting your shots? Are you lifting? Like we lifted 5 days a week when we were home, and as few as 2 days a week when we were not. And there were guys just missing all the time. And it's like, what am I going to do? Penalize you, not play you all the time? You're just not ready. And that's why, like, we had an A and a B team. That's why your team is losing and the other team is winning. That's what's happening there. Like, the work, the input will usually have some sort of correlation with the output. And if you're not putting in the input, what are we talking about?
Big time.
You're coming on a vacation because we're going to Vegas. You're spending a bunch of your parents' money to go see parts of the world, but you're not really here to play basketball. And it shows.
It really does. Holy. Oh, that was a good tangent, man. Like, I appreciate it. Shifting to more tactical, and this is why I wanted to get you on. We obviously, we leave pandemic, we get the chance to execute on certain things. We execute on, you just talked about how the operations, everything that went around it, how you kind of got around, making sure everything works. But now getting to the court, we wanted to talk today about I wouldn't, is it force middle or is it more like shading middle?
I call it force.
Force middle?
Yeah, I mean, we could call it whatever you want. The idea is that we're sending towards the nail from wherever. Yeah, from wherever.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how did it come about? Was it something you've always done? Was it just something that maybe came out of the pandemic after talking with some people, shifted your mindset?
Well, I mean, first of all, everybody plays sideline baseline. So in my opinion, like I played back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and
same.
The idea or the premise is that the sideline and the baseline act like extra defenders, and I never felt that to be true. I also felt that if everybody plays it, then the best players are just getting lots and lots of reps against it and figuring out how to get better against it. So when I coached, we definitely played it at York. Didn't love it. Did a little bit of it when I coached at Fleming. Didn't love it. I did some pro scouting for the Gungshung Steelers, and I did some pro scouting for the Tampa Bay Titans. We're a little bit better at it, but at the pro level, in my opinion, it's very much less team defense and very much more guard your man, who you're with. Yeah. And it's hard to have any kind of defensive system in place if that's what you're looking at doing when you're playing one-on-one. Like, the bottom line is you can stay in front of your guy or you can't, and then any sort of switching kind of hurts you. So I don't know, I fiddled with it a little bit in my mind. I watched lots and lots of videos over long periods of time, and I watched some pack line stuff, and there's some things that are in pack that I like, but most of it overall is not for me. One thing I've always hated is being on the line, up the line with your top hand up and your thumb down denied. I've always thought that was stupid. Just puts you out of position, closes you off to half position. And one thing that I've always liked is being able to support and prevent penetration. And like, for me, the real catalyst of this was I was at York, and in my second year I was asked to chart paint touches, and there was one game, it was like the second one that I did where it was like, I'm gonna forget the exact numbers, right? But it was roughly, there were 80 possessions in the game, excuse me, for us offensively. And we didn't have a great game, but we had paint touches on, let's call it 21 of them.
Yep.
And of those 21 paint touches, we scored like 75% of the time. And then on the 59 that we didn't have paint touches, we scored like 17, 18% of the time. So I'm like, all right, well, that is a massive difference. Does this hang true over a period of time? And then after charting 6, 7, 8 games, and there was absolutely a correlation, both teams, both directions. I started pulling up other games on Synergy and going through it because, you know, I'm a nerd. That's what I do. And sure enough, it was like, dude, there's like a 30 to 40% difference in the amount you score if you get a paint touch. And that goes from, you know, 30% more to like 50% more if you get multiple paint touches. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, well, the key to defense is paint touches. How do you prevent it? And it really comes back to supporting penetration. How do you support penetration? Well, you got to get in the gaps and you got to really take that away. So what do you give up when you start doing that? Well, you give up the long ball. How do you prevent that? Well, you got to rotate from other places. So, you know, we've put in some things like we next on ball screens that are going towards the middle. We actually help off of the strong side corner and we help off of the strong side corner and actually just straight up peel switch that, so the beaten ball defender ends up short closing that strong side corner, and that strong side corner becomes the new defender on the ball, so that we don't have to rotate from the low man on the other side of the floor. So we're shortening certain things, but what I also find that we do is we're making offenses look at something that they don't understand. Like we get a lot of players like, wait, the rotation's supposed to come from there. What's happening? Why is this the case? Or you get a lot of guys like, let's say it's a strong side drive, and instead of stunting or you know, volleyball digging from that strong side corner and trying to recover, we're full out peel switching, and then they end up running into the chest and getting a charge, or they make that outside pass, but they're beating ball defenders coming from behind and stealing the ball, and it's just like, we're getting a lot of extra possessions because of it. And the problem with it is, to do it very well, you have to be active, and like very active. Like guys have got to be prepared to run into the next closeout, etc. And you've got to also close at the right angle all the time, because a lot of guys, for some reason, for years have been playing sideline baseline. So you'll see a lot of guys close the wrong way and then shift their feet and try and send them back to the middle or whatever. And they'll get blown by because they're fooling around with their feet at that point. But when we're firing, I mean, this was the first year I ever won a live period event. And then we won the tournament following that. So we won the Carolina Live this year during the live period. And then the next week we won an ATL, one of the on the radar events. And then the weekend after that, we went 3-1. So like we started our AAU season 11-1, and I think it has everything to do with the guys buying into this and really playing it. And the interesting thing is that like so the first game that we played it with AAU this year, we won 51-15, and of those 15 points that other team scored, they had 8 free throws, so they only had 3 field goals, right? A 3 and 2 teams. The 3 was very much like an end of the quarter, end of the half heave. Good luck. So really, they scored 1 field goal in each half, and it's like, it's hard to not be fired up as a team when you're keeping a team that low in terms of their. And like, if you looked at these guys, I mean, they weren't poop soup. They were decent guys in terms of how they could play. They just couldn't figure out where we were coming from. And it just led to all these turnovers and bust outs and bad contested mid-range shots, long rebound, out we go. And, you know, you get 11, 12 dunks in a game. Now you're fired up and you're like, coach, this works, right? Like this works.
Yeah. So in teaching this defense, so a couple of things, like, was it hard to get the buy-in from the players? Because obviously a lot of them first started, it's like, you know, I'm not forcing to the middle. Like a lot of them probably have been taught, send it to the sideline, don't let it in the paint, all that stuff. Was it hard?
I have never really found buy-in very difficult. I find execution sometimes difficult, but I think the majority of my adult life, I've been a salesperson. So I'd like to think I'm decent with my words. And there's a lot of this. Hey, everything you've taught before, for me, that's wrong. It doesn't mean it's wrong overall, but it's wrong for me. Now, you've been doing things a certain way for X amount of time. So I understand doing it my way is going to take some time, but this works better. You will see. And if it doesn't, we will review and change. So kids are like, okay, I like that. But it's also like, think of all the coaching that you've had in your life so far to this point. How much do you trust those people in what they've been saying? And the unfortunate truth is that most youth coaches are regurgitating things that they've heard from other people and are not very good at actually understanding, why are we doing this? So when you come in and you're able to provide a reason, like, well, we do this because, the secondary shot is going to come from a contested 3-point shooter who doesn't shoot very well. Whereas in the other, it's going to be a drop off for a big who's smashing it in front of the rim. Which one is a higher percentage shot? When you can actually articulate the differences, kids are like, nah, dude, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to try it, coach. So I don't really feel that I've ever had a lot of buy-in issues. I think there's definitely execution issues, because it's like, I've trained this my whole life, coach. Like, what do you want? Like, how am I supposed to be able to get there and do that?
So what would you say would be the main teaching points of this defense?
So we get over everything, right? We employ the Carlton rule: never, ever, 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 ever get hit by a screen. So we're teaching our guys to get over and get back in front. We next. So if you get over a screen and the defender one pass away is supporting you, he'd be like roughly rim line. If he has now got the ball, and then the low man on the far side steps up to the beaten ball, the defender is going next to the corner. That one's tricky in terms of teaching. In terms of not getting hit by the screen, that one's tricky in terms of teaching, because a lot of kids, for some reason, want to bully into a screen and then try to get over, or they're taught the hook where they're inside hand, inside leg, and they're trying to pull themselves over. And I don't know who ever like implemented this to begin with, but it's just it's ridiculous footwork to me. So we changed the footwork to stepping on a clock and actually getting your nose in the person's back and then sprinting to get back in front of them. And what else would be in there that's tricky? Peel switching is not tricky where you're helping off the strong side corner, but kids actually tend to like that one. I think the biggest one out of anything is the short close. So we really believe, like I said, that paint touches are what win games. Well, we don't want to get 1 or 2 rotations into good defense, and then you end up with a 10-foot close, and you're running and jumping. You're the first one off the floor, and you blow by that guy, and now they're playing 5-on-4, and it's like, well, we played good defense until that happened, and now they're just going to have an advantage. So we short close everything all the way around, even if it's a good shooter. Like, you got to make 4 or 5 before we do anything different against you. And becomes interesting, because sometimes kids are going to look at you like, coach, that's 3. Like, do we switch?
Yes.
No, we're going to stick with, this was on Run It Back, this was a common theme that I would ask. At what point do you throw the audible?
Yes.
Right?
Do you make your adjustments?
Yeah, exactly. Like the
guy
that shoots 18% on the season just made 5 threes. Do I have to play him differently? Yeah, probably. Or am I going to accept that he's going to have a game and we let him beat us? This is coaching, right? At the end of the day, like, this is what you need to sit down, have a drink with a friend of yours, and really, like, how long would you do this? Or like, those kinds of things they're hard to deal with in the moment, and they can make or break trust with your players. But that being said, it's like you've got to figure out what you're comfortable with.
That's the essence, right? Because like you heard me talk about it a little bit with you, just like getting them to buy in, like have them understand that yes, this is what we're doing, and yes, it is possible for somebody who we don't think is a good shooter for them to hit 3 to start the game.
Right.
But ultimately, it's like, okay, what am I willing to give up? Contested over the span of a game,
Yeah.
or layups at the rim. So by you just being able to get the players to buy into that, it's really like an understanding of one, hey, there's anomalies. Certain times, certain things happen, right? But two, also, there's also this law that chances are that a bad shooter, if they start off and make 3, by the end of the game,
yeah, I said he'll trend towards that mean over time.
Exactly.
I mean, this brings about a much larger discussion. Like, so I
Yeah.
talk to players about this all the time. Basketball shots are not actually worth 2 and 3 points. Okay, like they are in the moment, obviously. But a basketball shot is actually worth what that player's points per possession are over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you shoot 1.4 points per possession from the field on a 2, and I shoot 0.9, even though I just made 3 baskets in a row, our team is actually losing points because I'm shooting the ball more than you are, right? So the difference there is 0.5 points per possession, which may not seem like a lot, but if we're making that decision over the course of 100 possessions, that's actually 50 points fewer that our team is going to score. And people don't understand the math on that and don't agree with it because they're like, no, that's nonsense. That shot is actually worth 2 points. And it's like, yes, in the moment it is, you are correct. But there's a basketball game is a long period of time where the math actually tends to support what you think. Are there anomalies? Yes. Are they as common as you think they are? No, not really. It's like a lot of people don't know this, but if you go and you look at the NBA averages over the past 50 years, the NBA has had 87 to 89 possessions every year for the past 50 years. The number hasn't changed. And they're scoring 30 to 40 points more per game in the past, 5-8 years than they were in the late 80s and the 90s. And it's like you can attribute that to, some people shoot better percentages, etc. Sure. You could also attribute that to people are taking better shots. Right? Like the people who have higher points per possessions are getting to shoot the ball more, and we're shooting less contested shots than we were back then because lots of factors. We don't have hand checking.
The rules have changed.
Yeah, for sure. But in addition to that, we've decided that like we're probably going to have a hierarchy of shots where it's like this is the best shot, the highest points per possession. We're going to move down that spectrum. And it doesn't mean, I'm not going to bring up the mid-range debate, but it doesn't mean that the shots that are lower on that spectrum are bad shots. It means that you're going to try and get the better shots first before you settle for the other shots later on. That's all it means. Really. And if you can teach that to youth, it will really help your points per possession as a team overall over the course of time because everyone starts working towards the same goal. And the last thing that I wanted to say about this, like we were talking about, when do you throw the audible and go away from what your scout was versus like what's actually happening? I think that has everything to do with what length of time you spent with that team. Because players that have played for you for a longer period of time who understand the discussion that we're talking about like, hey man, over the course of time, that guy hitting 3 doesn't actually hurt us. He's gonna go boom, and all his boys are gonna we overvalue shit in the immediate moment. But at the end of the game, he's gonna hold an L and you're gonna hold a W and we're gonna go home. Kids that have spent time with you and have seen that happen over a long period of time are now like, all right, I'm going to trust coach more. The leash is longer. Whereas kids that are new to your team, you might have to audible earlier in order, even if it's away from what you believe in order to preserve that trust.
Yeah.
Right? You might even be like, hey, man, we're going to shift this coverage. I don't agree with it, but I'm going to do it for your sake so you can see. And then, you film it and you go back to it.
Mm-hmm. You know, when, and we're just talking about, like, I think this subject we were just talking about is something that I hold very dear to my heart, because I kind of find like coaches overreact a lot, in my opinion, too quickly, because as the game goes on, there's certain pressures that come on, right? Because if you kind of see like a whole game as a glass of water, as the game's winding down, there's less and less water in this game, right? So it gets closer to the end. And I kind of find like a lot of situations, coaches overreact. And you're talking about the types of pressures that certain players have that get bigger and bigger as the game goes on. It could really make or break. And I don't think you necessarily need to switch everything. A lot of time it's just the team that can hold its ground and trust on the fundamentals that they have or the basics that they have on their scout. In my opinion, that makes a difference. I'll give you an example. If a non-shooter, right, has the ball in his hand with 2 seconds of the shot clock, what do they have to do? Shoot it, right? Well, there was actually no pressure on that shot for them to have to make it. So whether it goes in or not, it doesn't necessarily define, quote unquote, the quality of the shot or how impactful that three is. There was no pressure. The decision was already pre-made for the person. A non-shooter versus a good shooter based on numbers. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, you'll notice that those who are specifically not necessarily shooters, what they'll do at the beginning of the game, most of the time, they'll be more willing to shoot it. But as the game goes on, you start seeing the fourth quarter, players are going to go back. Players are going to go back to what it is that their strengths are, because at the end of the day, your confidence and the pressures, the best way for you to deal with it is to go back to what your strengths are.
I would agree with that. Interestingly enough, this example makes me think of 2 foul, 3 foul, 4 foul participation. And it's funny because you prefaced the whole discussion by coaches tend to overreact. If you have a real fall off between your first 5 players and your next 3, and you have a player that has 2 quick fouls, what is the real opportunity cost of taking that player off the floor and replacing him with somebody who's poop? Right? So this actually ties into the conversation of throwing audibles and not or whatever. So for me, I'd rather get every minute out of that better player, regardless of how many fouls he has, especially at the youth level. Like, I'd let him play with 4 in the first half. I don't care if he fouls out. That mistake was technically on him, but he's more valuable being on the floor. The contrary argument is he's more valuable being on the floor later in the game. And which is what you're saying, like, hey, a non-shooter's got 2 seconds later in the game and he there's no real pressure on him. He's got to shoot the ball, etc. It's outside of his traits. Mr. Meg, who cares really at that point? He had to. Well, the interesting thing to me is that, like, I think every second of the game is equally important. I don't actually think that the end of the game is more important than the rest. Like, we often talk about, like, oh, this player blew a layup in the last 60 seconds. And it's like, yeah, but we missed 6 of them in the first quarter. How are we going to ignore that part? Like, that's 12 points. Right. And it, like, I get that people don't agree with me. I get that people have a different point of view, but like 2 foul participation, 3 foul participation, all that kind of stuff. I'd rather have that better player be on the floor for as long as possible, influencing the game the way that they do, as opposed to sitting them on the bench, preserving fouls for this subjective amount of time at the end that is supposedly more important than the time of them being on the floor right now. Because it's like, how much is that subjective amount of time? Is it 4 minutes? Okay, if it's the last 4 minutes of the game are the most important, and we want him to be on for the last 4 minutes, the 4 minutes that he's not playing right now, how negative can that 6-player, 7-player, 8-player make the game in those 4 minutes right now compared to the 4 minutes at the end of the game? Because there are some kids that can very negatively influence the game in 4 minutes. And it's not to talk bad about anybody or whatever, but like it can go very bad very quickly, just like it can go, the way that it's supposed to go, having that right person on the floor. So it's interesting to me. I don't know why, but it makes me think of that discussion where, like every minute of the game is just important as another. And in doing so, when to throw that audible or when to make changes, etc., they're really coaches' decisions. And the better off your team will be understanding that these decisions are subjective and having trust in your leader, which ultimately comes back to what you were saying of, coaches overreact. Well, my opinion on coaching is always this: coaches lose games, players win games. All the credit goes to players, all the negative goes to coaches. And if you don't have a coach who thinks that way, players are never going to fully trust you, and they're never going to be fully accountable to you, because what you're actually asking them to do in the scenario that we're talking about is trust what I've designed. I think it's right. And if it's wrong, then the only person who should have responsibility is me, not you. You did what you were asked to do. And if you're the kind of person who at the end of the game is like, well, this guy missed that layup and blah, 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 that guy's gonna be like, hold on. Like, what about the 5 forced middles, coach, that help from the right position and dude's got a layup? That's your system, isn't it? You've got to be big enough to take that responsibility and not overreact, like you were saying.
Oh man, Menelik, I appreciate you. I'm gonna get into quick rapid fire questions, man, for you.
I do on these.
No. Okay. The most important skill in the game, in your opinion, right now? Shooting. By far. Why?
There's an old formula, I forget who designed it. 40% of winning is shooting, 30% is passing, and then everything else is attributed to the last 30%. I believe it's 20% rebounding, and then the other 10% are the little incrementals. I read that a long time ago. It made a lot of sense to me, and I have now found in the past 5 years that I think most people can evaluate. Most people want the biggest, strongest, best vertical leap, fastest runner, his arms, all of that. And it's like, dude, that guy is bad at basketball. I don't know how you don't see it. And they're like, well, potential. Well, like, I'm going to use a very specific player. Did Bruno Caboclo ever pan out for the Raptors? That was 2 years, and I'm sorry to mention your name specifically, but I think of him all the time. He was a good player who was placed in an unfortunate situation. The bar was here. He wasn't there yet. And they kept saying, until you're there, we're not going to play you. We're going to develop you, etc. And he ended up having expectations on him that were unfair. Everybody looking at him negatively, ultimately forced him out. And all he really did to have those expectations put on him was be tall and have long arms. There are certain players that are better at this, that are working harder at this, and that is most reflective, I feel, in shooting the basketball. If you're not out there getting your vitamins, as they say, taking 75, 100 makes every single day, I don't really think you want this. I don't think it's for you.
The number one value that you want your team culture to have.
Oh man, I guess accountability. I'm not a big culture guy at all. I really, negative culture will kill your team. Other than that, I don't really like to harp on, spend a lot of time, but I really do believe in accountability, myself included. I tell players all the time, call me out on it then. Like, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Let's get this fixed. Let's figure it out. And like, we run we run a lot of NBA and pro sets just from a lot of time watching Synergy. It's what I try to implement, etc. But I tell my guys all the time, if you have a layup, screw my play, go take your layup, but be right. Don't be wrong. Like if you're going to supersede what we're doing as a team, you better be right.
Mhm. Hardest thing about starting a prep school, because it's not for everybody.
Probably two things: stress and money, right? Like it's really difficult to put together a budget that really works. This is very expensive to do, and a lot of people I don't understand really at all where kids that are 5'7" can't make their high school team think they deserve 100% scholarship. Like where have we gone that we've gotten to this point? It's like, listen, man, I appreciate that this is expensive, I do, but traveling to 31 states is expensive as well, and I'm not paying that out of my own pocket. When I'm doing 20-hour drives, that gas money's got to come from you guys. That's what happens when we're playing in tournaments that you would never have. Like, dude, when I was in high school, we played like 14 games in a season. We played 55 for one team this year. I had two kids score 1,000 points this season. That's a whole career in most high schools. I had two kids in one season, and it's like, you're gonna come to me and be like, oh well, I don't know about money, I think I deserve more of a scholarship and all this, and I'm like, maybe you do, but like, where's that money going to come from? And then the stress related with having those conversations all the time, right? Like, it just, hey man, you're not where you think you are, and I'm sorry to be the person to tell you that, but like, that's what it is. And if you want to be where you want to be, that doesn't make sense. If you want to be where you think you actually are, you require a lot more work than what you're putting in currently. And if you do that work, you also have to be comfortable with the fact that you might not actually get to that point.
100%.
That's a real one that's a real one that people don't ever talk about. Like, hey man, all of high school is roughly 1,200 days. It's a little bit more, right? Like 4 years, 365. Call it 1,400 days in there. If you were one person, if Olivier worked every single day, did what he was supposed to do, get all his shots, blah blah blah, and I worked 60% of that time, that 40% that I'm not doing, right, reflects on what are 1440s, 40, 64, 640 days that I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I can never get that back. Never. Like, that graph is an exponential difference among you and I, right? Like,
over time.
Forget it. Like, I'm not in the same place that you are. I can never make it up unless you stop working and I put in 640 days in a row to catch up. And then we might not still be in the same place at that point because we're both bigger, stronger, older. So maybe you just matured faster. So you have to be comfortable with, when you're doing this, that if you put in the work, you might still not be where you want to be. So stress, man, stress and money, they're the two biggest ones.
100%. As a coach, last one. As a coach, what do you want your players to remember you by?
The two cliches. Listening is a skill, it can be developed, and the way that you do anything is the way that you do everything. That's me in a nutshell. I say them all the time, right? Like, when you walk into a store, you're perceived a certain way. When you walk into the movie theater, you're perceived a certain way. So you have to be, I mean, like let's be frank, the vast majority of us who play this game are people of color, and we're big. So the perception of us in everyday society is not the same as it is for everybody else. So, if we go play pro ball in Asia, the rules are going to be different. The perception is going to be different, etc. So the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Do you say please and thank you? Do you clean up after yourself? Do you, dress in a certain way to manage the way people perceive you? Or if you don't, do you recognize that they perceive you in a certain way, and do you diminish their fears by, being warm and receptive and listening? I mean, I can't tell you how irritated I get. Like, I ask one question, it's very specific, and the answer is something totally like, do you like A or B? Blue. And you're like, what? Like, you're not paying attention. So those would very much be the two that I hope to be remembered by.
Holy Menelik Fernandes, I appreciate so much. Where can people find you? on social media?
So terror_b-ball is me. That's Twitter and Instagram. And then terror_prep is the school. That's Twitter and Instagram as well. Olivia,
Mhm.
thanks, man. I really appreciate you. It's awesome to be here.
I appreciate you, and hopefully we get to run it back on the run it back, so.
Do that. I love that.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.